So what happens today is going to be a function of you guys, you know, that if people aren't engaged, then I don't know what to do. Alex, you said you wanted to start us off with some questions.
Yeah.
Fine.
Okay. So the question of the panel was, what's the chip going to look like in 2020?
Can you hear Alex at the end?
Can you hear me?
Go up,
Go
there's
up.
a microphone.
You guys are great.
Okay, no, so
See
I'll do
that?
it.
Terrific.
Good, Manolis. Good.
By the way, the last session, the last paper, I was a little bit unhappy that when the questioning was from close to the front of the audience, they spoke so softly that if you were more than 3 or 4 rows back, you couldn't hear them. So I'm hopeful that people are going to speak up. If you don't speak up from back there, we'll just have to put you on the panel.
So good. So this is your choice.
Now, well, with one exception, see, you can stay there.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, so the question is, what's the chip going to look like in 2020? And then some of the issues posted in this only slide was whether it would be multi-core, it would be heterogeneous, blah, blah, 3D stacking, so on and so forth. Okay, so bear with me for a moment, and let us assume it's going to be heterogeneous and it's going to be multi-core. Okay? Most people would probably agree to that.
I don't think anybody would not agree to that.
Good. So that's settled. It's going to be multi-core, it's going to be heterogeneous. Now my question is on what will these heterogeneous things look like? So when we talk about accelerators, are we talking about programmable processors, reconfigurable logic, or single function logic? Okay. Is it going to be one of the three? Is it going to be a mixture of the three? So are you going to have a piece of hardware that does vector multiplication very fast and very efficient? Are you going to have something that does searching for the first one in an array that's set very efficiently? Or are you going to have a set of functional units that you're going to tie together in a particular dependency matter, like the Magic processor from Stanford? Or are you going to have a whole bunch of processors, like the cell SPEs, or the multi-cores that we have today, only running at different frequencies and different ILPs and such? Okay, so that's question number one. Okay, now let us assume there's going to be some of these accelerators or some of these heterogeneous components that are going to be programmable. Okay, so now those programmable processors, are they going to run an operating system or not? Okay, are they going to be shared by multiple threads in the same application? Are they going to be shared by multiple applications? Okay, how's that sharing going to be? Are you going to support context switching on those programmable processors? Are you going to support preemption on those processors? Okay, those I think are non-easy questions, and I don't even have answers to all of them. I would be wrong if I would providing answers. So, what do people think about these issues?
No operating system.
Absolutely right.
Good. Because, you know, I was waiting for Alex to say something about interrupts, but he didn't. Okay.
So actually, not absolutely right, but 98% right. So if we can come up with primitives that the operating system can use, there's no reason why that can't be part of that core that is running the operating system. Yes? You buy that, yeah. But the emphasis on the what I call the heavyweight core would be what you say. It would not run the operating system. It would run that part of the code that needs the high performance of the heavyweight core, the application. We're on the same page? Yes? Yeah.
So if I understand both of you correctly, whenever I need something from the operating system, like an I/O, reading from a file into a piece of memory, I'm going to ask someone else to do it for me?
Whenever who's I? You're going to ship you on the chip?
I am the accelerator, I am this heterogeneous component, I'm running a piece of the application, I've consumed all the data that I was given, so I need new data coming from disk. I'm not running an operating system, so I don't have access to the device. Okay, you're not giving direct access to the device, to the application.
Yeah, you go through the OS, you go through the core that is running the OS.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, you look at these, you look at a system on a chip, there's one core that's controlling, that's a sort of a controller for everything.
Louder.
I've lost my voice, unfortunately. Luckily,
What he says, unlike this panel, somebody has to be in charge, see?
So if you look at, actually what Alex was describing is an OMAP chip, isn't it? A TI chip. It's a heterogeneous multi-core thing, so that they already exist by the memories. But they're still very primitive because a lot of the cores on them aren't, there may be some graphics rendering or the DSP, actually I think it has a DSP, and then some codec processors, if you like, very application specific. So you can imagine that becoming much bigger. So for instance, your laptop might just be one chip that has everything in it, right? Because in 2020, really the integration levels are going to let you put all the things up, just take the inside of that thing and then just integrate it onto one chip. I know that sounds sort of unexciting, but I'm sure that's going to be an important direction. And then there'll probably be things that are symmetrical multi-core things for server applications. Although you could imagine companies like Google actually running GPUs and things like that, so they can provide those services more efficiently than they do currently. So the OS, I think, will be on. So if you look at these system on a chip, they have you've got a data plane where you've got all these little heterogeneous cores, and you've got a control plane, which is usually a single conventional von Neumann machine running some sort of scheduler or maybe even an operating system.
To address more your question, the way
Oh, you're in danger to end up there. Speak louder.
Okay, so to address your question, the way I see it, at least, I didn't go far enough in that domain, although there is something I might like to do. The accelerators, as I see them, I assume you meant accelerators, although they might be sort of, let's say, less general purpose processors optimized for specific tasks. The way I see accelerators now is as slave units. It's
As
not
what?
Slave units. They are not units that make requests for data. They are just units that do processing. And they are activated by an application which provides the data to them. And that has some implications. For example, you probably want to make this as function calls from user space, which means the accelerator would probably need to have the same view of the memory. So it will need some sort of memory management unit, which is expensive then, because you think of an accelerator as something very small. If you look at
A GPU is not small.
It's not small.
So the first accelerator that I can, because I was just a young guy and can't go back from time very far, was produced by Intel. It was called the 8087. It did floating point operations, and it did exactly what you said. It was a slave to the main processor, which was the 8086. And they're about the same size, so they're not small. It also didn't access memory, and it didn't sequence to a program counter. It was a baby gorilla sitting up there, waiting for the 8086 to spoon feed
It
it.
shared the instruction fetch, right?
I don't think so. I
I
think
think
it
it sort of did. I
shared
mean,
the instruction fetch. I
well,
don't think so.
they split it because they
I
had two
thought-
separate chips, right?
That's
The
right.
instructions stream was one thing.
And the instruction stream, I thought, went on to the 8086, and the 8086 goosed the
Yeah.
8087, asking it to perform the operation and providing the data. I can
But
be wrong.
No, I mean, but it decoded the instructions for the.
I think the 8086 decoded the instruction. Yeah. So this concept of accelerator being a slave, I think, has been around forever.
So that's a very tiny code.
And in fact, so I've interrupted, and I didn't need to do that. Let me talk, then you go back and you can talk some more.
I hope I
please.
don't forget it.
No, I want you to.
Otherwise, I don't mind the interruptions. I like it as well.
No, I will stop. You talk.
Okay, so the way I see it is they are slave. Whether now the question is how to integrate it with the operating system. Since the operating system usually allows multitasking, it's conceivable that more tasks would like to use the same accelerator. And then indeed you might have some problems. Do you preempt the current task of the accelerator? This, I think, depends on a by case basis, because it depends what the accelerator does. If it does encryption and it processes 64-byte blocks and it processes one block every few cycles, then preempting doesn't make much sense. You just switch from one block to the other. You wait for the current block for, I don't know, 10 cycles and it finishes anyway. Now, if you are doing something more complex that would take seconds, then you need to find a way to preempt it, to save the current state, which can be tricky, I imagine. But probably it can be done because that processor, well, assuming it's performing a very long
What's the
operation.
question?
I'm trying to answer this question.
So he's telling me that it depends on a case-by-case basis.
So
I would even give you an answer. You have 2 accelerators. And then I don't have to preempt. So you say, what if you have 3? I have 3 accelerators.
Real estate is limited.
Huh?
Real estate is
So I don't think
limited.
real estate is limited. I think moving forward, so Trevor wants to put the kitchen sink and everything else on that chip.
Well, I'm saying it's already done.
It is, but it's done, but you also said it's done in a very limited.
Yeah, well, it's
limited
very,
way.
that's small scale.
And it's never gonna be fully done, because as we do more and more, the applications grow, and then you're always gonna have the memory bandwidth problem to go on the chip, so it's never gonna be, until the number of transistors on a chip, until Moore's law allows us to have an infinite number of transistors on a chip, we'll always have a partitioning problem, yes?
Well, to some extent.
Which is by 2013 or something.
I mean, the thing is, Yale, that you can stack things and you can completely eliminate the memory bandwidth problem.
So that's an interesting notion, so,
And it's just waiting for people to go and look at this problem. Well, it's not a problem, but let's see what this extra dimension does for you.
so, no, I'm on the same page with you with 3D, there's no question. But what you're doing now, so, Chris disappeared, what did he do? He, had to put out a fire at Arm or
You
something?
have to go and live. So,
One of the luxuries of being college professor, we get paid even though we don't earn it. Yeah. No, the third dimension, so I think it was him that brought up, maybe it was you, the notion that 80% of the chip will be the memory controller, you know, the gather scatter, all the other stuff that goes into, should we prefetch, should we demand, well, no, only prefetch what's useful, you know, all that stuff associated with memory, 80% of the chip. What I'm hearing now is that 80% will be on these higher levels of the, not, so we're talking physical now, the other levels of the 3D stack of stuff. And you think that's the answer, that we're gonna be able to manage the memory thing through, so what do I got? I got 10 layers, we say 80%, so I got 5 layers, I guess. And the bottom layer is the processor, and the other 4 layers is the memory, and I'm gonna be able to do everything between the memory and off chip, feeding the processor, so that becomes a non-problem.
no, I mean, your memory's gonna be big enough that you've got, just like any other system. The memory from the core to the primary memory, that hierarchy is just gonna get flat. We're not gonna have 3 levels of cache. There's no need for it.
Is that right?
I don't think so.
So historically.
Maybe one is enough.
So historically, the reason for multiple levels of cache is that you can't have big and fast both at the same time. You think that law of physics goes away? You
Yes.
probably wouldn't call it law of physics. Go ahead.
No, you need several levels of cache, because the level 1 cache, people tell me, is integrated within the VLSI of the processor itself. very tightly coupled with the buses, and it's on the order of 16 to 64 kilobytes. Then next to each processor, you can dedicate some area to, I don't know, I would say 8 SRAM blocks around the processor. And then you might want to have a last level cache in the chip. Well, of course, if you are doing 3D stacking, then you have a bonding pad close by, so you can go directly to
Yeah, but I mean,
to
why
DRAM.
do you need those other levels? If you look at DRAM, it's got tremendous bandwidth internally. It's because you're pulling the stuff through a very narrow port. So you stream it over a 64-bit bus, say on a PC. You stream a whole row of stuff off of the banks in the memory chip. And
So what he wants to do is put a row buffer hit.
boom, just grab
Both
them,
up.
take 1,000 bits and slam them straight into the L1 cache.
Correct, I agree with that movement, but the problem is that you are not always processing. There are cases where you combine some data that are here and others that are there, so one of them can drop to the processor, but the other one will have to move horizontally through the network on chip. And unfortunately, movement of data consumes energy. And networks
It also
on chip,
consumes time.
the movement of data, whenever you need to combine them from far away, it's a major, I'm afraid it is a major contribution to energy consumption comparable to the processing itself.
Well, how about time even?
Well,
Consumes time.
but if you can grab the piece of memory, once you've grabbed this one, you grab that one. I mean, I'm not quite understanding what you're saying. But
The throughput will not be for free because it consumes energy. I mean, the network
Correct.
on chip may
it
have
consumes
wide,
much that.
wide
There
links.
was a bullet on one of the slides I gave the other morning that shows you the energy consumption if you are doing die-to-die connections is 3 orders of magnitude less than.
Correct. Compared to off-chip, it is a big savings. But still on-chip, the movement of data through the network on chip is considerable energy. The network on chip is a considerable portion of the chip.
I mean, you can,
So
look,
throughput is not for free.
no, it's not for free, but you can, so for instance, one thing that we just finished designing is a crossbar. So there's a nice thing to move data on a chip, right? You can connect your processors to, conceptually to a bunch of maybe other processors or memory banks. This thing,
Doesn't consume any power,
it can,
area.
it has 128 channels of 16 bits. You could be organized. So it's a crossbar, which is 128 by 128. And it runs at about 600 megahertz, 130 milliwatts. It's got a terabit. If you do a bisection through this thing, it's a terabit a second. Actually, well, all I'm saying is that
because we designed the crossbar, our crossbar was more power hungry. So congratulations. To
well, you
that
can
one.
see, it's published by SSCC. I mean, it doesn't have to be that these things are power hungry. If you do of course, ultimately, yes, they are. They're not going to scale to millions of connections.
Does that figure include the power to drive the wire from one end of the chip to the other?
Yes.
I mean, the repeaters on those.
And you know the biggest problem actually with a thing like that is laying out. So suppose you wanted to connect 16 processors to 16 memory banks. The crossbar is small enough that the problem is getting the routing wires from the processor cache lines to this thing, actually.
I agree absolutely with that. Yes, our design was the same.
I mean, it's a congestion problem for the layout. It's not a, and it doesn't have to be a high-powered device. I'll got a copy of the paper on my laptop. Or you probably don't, but it's, these things can be done. In fact, there's a very good example in the Niagara. They have a crossbar sitting between 9 memory banks and a processor, I think it was. and
That's true.
and it's a
power-
massive thing.
And it's power hungry, isn't
It
it?
is power
And
hungry.
it consumes a shitload of area on the chip? Yes.
No, it doesn't.
Doesn't?
It does not. If you look at die layout, it's actually quite small.
Really?
Yes. You look, we know it's an n squared thing, so it's going to grow. It's not going to scale. But the problem or the thing is in computing, n is always a small number, unless you're in software looking at it. But I mean,
Theoretical computer science.
yeah, they tend to do limit studies, right? N tends to infinity, but for us, n is 100 most, right?
No, you're-
So then your multiplicative constants are the things that matter.
But I'm still back to the notion that I'm always gonna have a robot for hit, a robot for miss, and all of a sudden it takes a long time.
No, I'm not saying you don't need caches. I said you didn't need an L3.
No, so what I'm saying is that, so what I'd like to have on the chip is an infinite capacity of memory, single cycle access. I don't think I can have that. You're telling me I can do it with two levels.
You can run out of an L1 cache, right? And
So he's right, you gotta be tightly coupled with the L1 cache, yes?
yes.
Now you're gonna have your L2 cache to be able to feed the L1 cache.
You may or may not want to do that, but just think of
Or bring it right into the process.
of having lines in the cache that are 256 bytes or 128 bytes.
No, I absolutely buy that.
I'm going to bring those 1,000 bits into, when I do a line with a miss on the cache, I can get in 3 cycles the complete line slammed into the cache. That's going to make.
If I get a robot for hit.
Why do you say that?
Or else you go the next iteration, right?
Huh?
If you don't have the hit, then you will just
Wait.
go on the next iteration. You wait.
A long time.
Why?
It's not a long time, it's much shorter than now.
Actually, look up in a DRAM's notes. What makes DRAM slow is that you're bringing things out through a
No,
relative.
so I well understand the notion that you have a low buffer and you then funnel it through the number of pins in the chip.
You're concerned about charging the thing up.
And all this other stuff, and a write after a read, and there's so much stuff that it hurts my brain every time my students try to explain it to me,
Okay, so let me just say that. How about if you had this facility which gives you low power, low latency, high bandwidth connection to large memory, physical memories? How would you redesign your computers? So you put this one, so you could have your system on a chip now is actually a 3D, your chip is this way too. Maybe not very many that way. So ultimately, you're going to have to draw a circle around this thing and get data into this cube or whatever it is you're building. But, so that, you're going to have to drive pins eventually.
So we got that solved. So
We don't have it solved.
No, we solved in the sense of a target for the future, that if I've got n layers, the 3D, then let's say I have n minus 1 memory,
Well, let me
and
ask.
I've got one processor, and so what I'd like to have is a processor running flat out, but it has to be fed. And we've all seen examples of some of these cockamamie multi-core chips that have to be run at a very low frequency in order to keep all the cores busy, right? So we don't want that. We want to be able to run them at high frequency, but still feed them. And right now, we're limited by pin bandwidth, and you're saying that if you design these layers above the processor layer correctly, you can hide much of that.
There'll be another class of problems that you run into, but it's going to give you much more access to data more rapidly for less energy than we experience today. What would you do with that? What's the kind of system would you build with? So if I build a machine with 128 cores in it, which we just did actually, why would I want to do? I mean, we want to do it just as a demonstration thing. It's not, you can't even build an operating system on it. But why would you want to build that machine if you were a rational person and not an academic? What's it going to be used for?
Well, you could be an industry person who just wants to do it to show that they can.
Well, yeah, so you get these demonstration things from Intel.
That's
Yeah,
right.
No,
So there will always be people who want high
More.
computation power and who have more than $100 or $1,000 to spend.
correct.
One of those things with a processor chip and some DRAMs started to it is going to cost between $100 and $1,000. So there will always be people who have more money than that, and they will always want to put several of those close to each other and make them cooperate to solve a bigger problem.
Okay, yeah.
So
I
there
agree.
will be again another level of hierarchy, and there will be again some accesses that are remote.
Yes, indeed. So when you're saying you've got a sort of self-similarity in the system, right? Yeah.
So you're saying what, that L3 cache will be
Well,
off the chip, I guess?
No, then it will be a cache between these
So you have
these
three chips,
clusters of
the
100
chip, the
chips.
chip, and then the L3 cache that will feed these two chips.
No, I don't know how you'd organize it, whether it be a cache. I think you were saying that, yeah, there's always going to be, if you give a guy 100 of these things, 100 processor cube, then some guy's going to come along and say, give me 6 of those. So then how am I going to put them together? And then you go back to the model of the multi-core thing, except now it's multi-clusters of things or something like that.
I want to go back to my original question and try to something you just said. You just developed a machine or a system with 128 processors, and there's no way to boot an operating system into it.
Correct.
But a while ago, there was a hand raised back there that said no operating system, and nobody argued that statement. So how difficult can it be to boot an operating system in one of those 128 processors and have all the other 127 work as slaves?
So
Uh,
that- go ahead.
No, well, we're confusing. I actually didn't necessarily agree with the statement about no operating system, but,
So I do.
No.
So I do agree with the statement of operating system. So whether the operating system is going to run on one core or multiple, it's already the case that it's running on more than one core. I would argue that the operating system is different from the heavyweight core that is running an application a lot faster than the Mickey Mouse cores. The same chip, so let's say, I don't know, 2, 4, whatever the software people can do to provide the parallelism in the operating system to run on more than one core. And it's already here, it'll be here more. But it'll be a small subset that's doing the operating system, okay? In addition, there'll be these other cores.
I agree with that. I'm not arguing with that.
No, I know you're not, but I guess I'm responding more to Alex's fundamental question, which the answer is that these heavyweight cores will not do the operating system stuff. When they need an I/O or they need something the operating system will provide, they'll go to the operating system. They'll go to that piece of the chip that is running the operating system. Why is that?
Well, that is an operating system. It just happens to be dedicated. You're taking the heterogeneous thing to sort of a logical step and saying, look, I've got a graphics processor, why shouldn't I have an MLS processor? Is that what you're saying?
That's right, yes. And in fact, that's exactly right.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
I like it.
So then why are we doing it wrong? So New Haven, 6 cores, Power 7, 8 cores, and Di Barcelona, 4 cores, and Chalmers is going to have 8. But then there's your paper in Niska, similar recently, applications have 2 threads. So why do we run our operating system on all 8 of the cores?
Because it's easier for Intel to step the reticle than do more than one design.
I think that's an important driver in this case. It's you've got a NAND gate, or in this case a computer. You just lay it down, right? And that's easier than building a heterogeneous system.
In fact, I was on a panel at High Peak in Pisa, and I was the only one on the panel who was pushing this heterogeneous thing. And we had a guy from Intel, in fact, Intel, your shop, Intel. He was part of the product group rather than the research. Yeah. And he was pushing homogeneous. And then we had another guy from Hewlett Packard who also likes Barcelona, Italian guy who lives in Barcelona, without mentioning any names. And he was pushing homogeneous, you know. And the answer, I think, is the obvious answer, that it's easier for the company. But I think that's turning around. I think the companies are now starting to realize that it's the wrong answer.
Well, if you look at the embedded world, they already do that, because that's what ARM sells as cores, right? Every system on the chip, not every one, but a lot of them have one of their cores in the core. Is basically running the operating system. It's managing these heterogeneous blobs of logic that sit around that do, codecs and DSP and whatever else is
Then
in.
how many applications run on those embedded systems? So usually each one of those accelerators is targeting one of the applications running on that system. Okay, now if you go to a general purpose computing machine, many applications would like to access that DSP that you initially put there only to process the signal.
So in the general purpose, you put on 2 DSP accelerators. In fact, there is a company that's based in Armonk, New York, that came up with a chip that had these very heavyweight processing elements. I think they call them synergistic processing units. And then they had another Mickey Mouse core on that chip running the operating system. Right?
I'd put it the other way around.
I'm sorry?
The SPUs were not heavy.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Would you say they were heavy?
The SPs are small.
Yeah, that's.
They're not
If
heavy,
you
they're not
compare their
doing,
performance,
so
they're not.
they're doing the lion's share of the work, no?
Well, they should
And
be.
in fact, the PowerPC chip, the PowerPC, not chip, core, the PowerPC core was clearly a Mickey Mouse core.
Well,
Yeah, they just
relative-
took one off the shelf
Yeah,
because they
that's
didn't
right.
want,
Relative
why?
to
Because they
total.
didn't want to have to redesign the operating system. That's the reason why that PowerPC core is on that chip.
Yeah, that one
At least that's what the
I mean,
chief architect of the chip
SP
thinks.
The SPUs had, were powerful. I'm not saying they were trivial, but they were relatively simple architecture.
No, so I wasn't saying, so, we're not disagreeing. But my point is that the heavy lifting was being done by the SPUs. And the Mickey
Right.
Mouse
So-
RPC core was running the operating system. They just took one off the shelf. They didn't design, in fact, I guess there's never gonna be a cell 2, apparently. But Hofstee showed, photomicrographs or, first stages in the second generation of cell, which would change that core to a more substantial PowerPC for running the operating system. In fact, put 2 of them together on the chip. So there's this concept of having a core that runs the operating system separate from the cores that are needed to do the heavyweight applications, or, what we say is the M's-law part.
I guess the argument against that would be that it's got to be a resource part. This one thing's going to be doing all the scheduling.
So, that's only true if the granularity of the scheduling is small, right? And that's hopefully not, that's intentionally not the case, right?
That's what you call small. If you go big enough in that not small definition, you're going to end up wanting to do I/O from the synergistic processing element.
I guess that, so, now we invoke Manolis' comment from the first day, which is the granularity of the data transfer to the heavyweight core, so that if you need 4 bytes of data from the memory or I/O system, whatever, do you ask the operating system for byte 1 and then byte 2 and byte, so does it take 4 requests, or does it take 1 request? I'm using byte to sort of, make it absurd. What if the request for I/O is big, and you DMA, in fact, I think you used the term DMA when you described it, and you DMA that stuff in, then the number of requests becomes small, no?
My concern was not on the complexity of the request. Okay, I totally agree with Manolis on the DNA part. Okay, we've been discussing it over time. The thing is whether it needs.
I don't think anybody wants
I don't
that.
think we want to do that.
So,
The problem is, if you
there's
know
only one, there's
DNA,
only one character in his stream of characters that I don't understand, this one here, right? I don't know if we want to share this with them, you know?
so the thing is, if you do a that DNA from this into your particular memory, one request, it's going to be fully automated. You can even overlap it with computation, do all sort of funny stuff. But then you're going to need protection. You're going to need address translation. Okay, and those fall on the operating system side. So you're going to have an MMU of some sort. You're going to have a TLB or some other address translation table. You're going to have misses. So who's going to resolve those misses? Who's going to resolve those page faults? Okay, I'm concerned that operating system processor that we're putting there is going to end up being fully overloaded. Okay, imagine 256 cores making requests about page faults and TLB misses and memory allocation and all sort of stuff, let alone division by zero exceptions.
Now, division by zero, division by zero to kick it to the operating system. So why can't that stuff be partitioned? Why can't, and in fact, the division by zero is a good case in point. So why is a division by zero, which actually doesn't have the trap at all, I suppose, but even if we do that, so I'd rather say 0 divided by 0. How about that one, right? Your classic NAND. Does it have to kick it to the operating system, or can those exception handlers be dealt with at the layer at the level, in the core where they're produced? Is there anything about, so the difference between resources that's off the chip, it's got to be managed by the operating system, in my view, and stuff that has historically been done by the operating system because, what the hell, why not? And I would say division by zero, what I would prefer is 0 divided by 0, a NAND, which now gets kicked to the, you take a fault, you kick it to the operating system. There's no reason why that has to be. It could be done locally, right?
Well, that's one very.
You don't agree with that?
And no, I'm not disagreeing, but I don't think that answers the general question. Just,
No, so the general question is partitioning the functionality of the operating system.
You know,
It could be done globally, and what could be.
if you've got if you've got a room full of servers doing some enterprise computing, you probably do want to have an operating system on each one. And in fact, the trend has gone even further, hasn't it? Because what they do, these large installations, is they actually virtualize the machines so that they can move it. They can move essentially the virtual machine around among these cores and basically pack everything into the smallest number of cores, so that some energy management opportunities and close down the ones that are not needed. So they've actually injected a hypervisor under the operating system. So it's more heavyweight in a sense. I mean, from a global point, you've got more junk, more operating system junk. You've now got the operating system running on top of a
Okay, so,
hypervisor.
yeah, so just to interject one notion is that I'm not suggesting that the operating system runs on a Mickey Mouse core. There's no reason why that core can't be a heavyweight. In fact, if you look at some systems that are run, Amdahl's law is when the operating system is running, right? So much of it.
So there may be two models. One in which you have, your core that runs the operating system, and others where the thing is completely symmetric. And they're different sort of application spaces.
Why would you want to completely symmetric?
Because you want to be able to move you. I mean,
No, the use fine.
people want to be able to move the system around. They want to load balance. They actually want to be able to move the virtual machine from one process to another for a variety of reasons. And
You're just drying your fingernails. I couldn't tell whether you had a question.
No.
You're drying your fingernails.
Yes.
so I don't see those two things being separated. They're really different application spaces.
So the funny word virtualization came up. So then, tying back to my original question, are you going to be virtualizing the, I'm going to call it the heterogeneous components of the core, or you just suggest that some of these systems will just not have it? So even virtual machines might have a use for some accelerators. Okay, you might offer in this cloud or virtual machines, you might offer a given type of accelerator.
I think you'll see that happening. So your heterogeneity will creep into the cloud just because, you know,
I don't understand the word cloud.
All right. Whatever.
No.
Room full of computers that you.
Oh, okay, cloud is the old time sharing model that we used to use 40 years ago. That's what a cloud is.
It's got some connection to that. Yeah. You're just a bunch of people using these resources, which are, you know, 1,000 computers in there.
Okay.
That's the whole idea. Rather than you do it on your laptop.
So I understand that, but anytime somebody tells me they're gonna put it in the cloud, I get lost, because I just don't understand this thing called the cloud. But I could be the only one in the room that doesn't understand that, so I should probably.
No, I don't understand that.
I'm sorry?
I don't understand it either.
The cloud?
Yes.
Didn't Greeks invent the cloud?
That's different.
So you have to have faith, Kelos, it's gonna work, see? So, so I guess I lost you as a question.
Well, he was enumerating all the things that you want to be able to do in an operating system and saying that this is going to be a problem for one for us to do effectively correctly.
So we're back to what I said, that why do we have to enumerate all these things? Why can't we partition? So am I wrong in the following sense?
So now you want a core that does memory management, a core that does...
not a core that does, but are there functions? In fact, maybe every heavyweight core does. So is there functionality in the operating system that belongs in the operating system because, so the operating system is the guy that's in charge, or the woman that's in charge, right? And anything that is going to go off the chip, somebody has to be in charge. In my view, you say that we want to make it better. Is there stuff that we currently give to the operating system because it's in charge that we could give to the to all the heavyweight cores? So let's say the business of a TLB or something, and now every one of the heavyweight cores has a TLB and it does all the address translation. So by the time it kicks it to the operating system core, all that's been worked out. Okay, now I've just introduced another problem, the consistency of those TLBs, say. But I'm back to this notion that why can't we partition the operating system into those things that have to go off and those things that can be managed locally? Is that, you say that's just one way to do it, why isn't, so,
Well,
okay, let me go
because
way out.
I think there's an application space that perhaps acts as...
That would be a bad idea.
In which that might not be the best way to do it. It might be better to have symmetrical systems. Because you don't want to pick which machine. It makes scheduling things easy. If I want to buy some computing, then it's from this resource, but it's a collection of these computers. It makes it much easier if it's symmetrical, I think. I haven't thought about it very carefully, but I think it is. And that's the genesis behind these symmetric cores, I think, is to
And so all this.
provide some hardware support for that. But there's also, I think you're right in recognizing that companies like Intel, it's in their interest to do that because it's easier for them to do that. Because they just have to design one core.
And so you're running an application and it gets compiled with no notion of heterogeneity, because all the cores are the same, and then it kicks it to this thing called the cloud, which then...
And then I can, if I want to add more stuff to my room full of computers because we can't do everything, it's easy for me to add more machines.
So symmetric will certainly always do that, right?
And if one of them breaks, or if you've got some, fault tolerant issues, again, you've got to. But you can see both environments because there are clearly large there are large installations out there that look exactly like this, right? But then there are heterogeneous things in pretty much every device that you have, almost starting with a PC. You could argue a PC is a heterogeneous device because it's got different kinds of function units in it. So I would think what Intel might do, or somebody, is put all that functionality. A simple thing would just be to grab all those blocks and stick them on one chip, which is sort of happened, hasn't it? I mean, the graphics thing is starting to migrate onto the same chip. So that's an easy way of using the stuff that you expect in 2020 to get back to. All I'm saying is, if you want to look at something new, why not think about 3D, for instance? What would you do with that? It's another dimension, literally, that we haven't really studied very much on how that's going to impact the way we design systems. We're looking at what's going to be around in 2020. I'm just throwing out one of the things. I mean, there's going to be lots of other things.
So I buy that, and that's my comment, that all the layers above that first layer is going to be to deal with the memory thing, so that I can do a row buffer transfer, in one cycle or whatever. It still leaves us with on that bottom layer, I'm still going to have, 256 cores?
What?
And they're all going to have a graphics unit. Each one of these chips is going to have a graphics unit and a this and a that.
Well, you could, maybe you could have 100 cores and 20 graphics units. Or 20 something else units, physical engines or something, if you're into gaming, you're going to provide that service.
So you have to virtualize them.
Yeah,
It's like, I think, yesterday Manolis gave this analogy. It's like a printer. You have a room full of students and there's only one printer. Okay. It's a problem. You put them all on a chip. Yeah, well, you put them all in a room and you can compress things due to technology, but still 20 students, one printer. Okay. If one of them has to print a 200-page document, and I have to print my boarding pass for tomorrow's flight, I'm going to have to wait for a long time.
If I have one printer.
If I have one printer.
So I have two printers.
Okay, so now I will have two nasty students. They're printing the entire bibliography on the printers, 500 pages each.
I cut off their testicles and I'll never do it again.
So are you going to do that to the application then? So I have my cryptography engine, and instead of sending the usual 64 byte block, I send a 2 megabyte file. Okay, and then the other processors complain to the operating system, and the operating system kicks my balls out of the crypto engine.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one design.
So we prioritize them. I mean, we do that all the time, right? If you have a student that's gonna, it may not be your boarding pass, but it could very well be a 2-page thingy, and this clown wants to print, the Library of Congress or something. So you schedule him, do it in the late morning when everybody's asleep, but don't do it in the middle of the night when everybody needs a compute resource.
But the point of Alex is that will you need preemption, and does that cost in the implementation?
All of this virtualization has a
yes.
It makes complexity, preemption even worse, more complexity. Okay? Everybody wants to get rid of interrupts. Hey, I said it.
Good. Go ahead.
I have a question. What do you think if we, instead of thinking just at a master slave model, we think also of a more advanced hierarchical model, which you have a processor, things are organized in clusters, and there are hierarchies in what module does what. Because basically, if you take the factory analogy, right, you don't have 1 million workers and one manager or two managers. Everything is done in layers. It's like a pyramid. So unless you can design both the processor and the operating system to take into consideration that you don't have just two types of processors, so just the processors who work and the ones who manage. You have to make it partially specialized and let them communicate with each other, I don't think you can manage 1,000 or 10,000 core chip. It's going to get a mess, and it's going to be a lot of bottlenecks. It's like a factory or like an army unit, right? Everything has to be organized, and if you want to share a resource, you don't have to share it with India or China. You have to share it within a room. You have a printer in this room. Somebody on the other side of the planet wants to print something, they should buy a printer there, right? So I think whenever we design a very complex system, we look at the history of mankind and what people did before, and people try to do things hierarchical. And I didn't see that in any of these new architectures that are being proposed, how to make this thing happen also on a chip, for example. How to have 3 layers or 10 layers of responsibilities and abilities between the components.
So I would argue that the Army and the factory have somebody in charge. Otherwise, my country would try to attack too many countries at the same time if there was only one person. If each general could direct his part of the Army. So there has to be, in any organization, to use Manolis' factory example, somebody in charge. In a factory, it is not the case that at the middle level, these managers do whatever the hell they want. They're being directed from above and above and above until you have, you know, one person, if you will, directing the show. So we already have that in these organizations that you relate, and I don't see why that we haven't suggested the same thing on the chip. So there's one in charge that then hands it to some use your word, hierarchical thingy that then can either do it itself or spread it, you know, to others. In fact, SAMOS is sitting there. It's called demand-driven data flow, for example, in your vernacular, so that it keeps getting breaking and breaking and breaking and then percolates up. But that is not inconsistent, I don't think, with having something in charge.
No. The way you go down, you also specialize. We're not going to ask you I/O to go and deliver you memory there, no? Or you should do so. So there is also specialization in this hierarchy. There are specific type of workers, and they are different kinds. The one is good for one thing, and the other set is good for another thing. And while going down to this hierarchy, you better indeed involve the group of accelerators or whatever the name is of the right type.
So I guess, you know, back to Alex's earlier question, is the accelerator a baby gorilla that's just doing a particular function, or is the accelerator a processor that's doing more than that? So I would argue that the heavyweight core is processing code with accelerators for specific functions hanging off of it. And that's one heavyweight core, and then there's another heavyweight core. Up above, the work is given to this one or is given to that one. It still begs his question of, now, what are these two guys going to do when they both need I/Os? So they do the DMA thing via the operating system. So why is that not the right model?
Because at some point there will be a bottleneck in the system.
I'm sorry?
It will not scale. You will have 1 million small cores.
Whoa, there we go again. 1 million small cores. Where'd that come from?
It's a number in the future. It's a
Right.
You have X small cores
We're talking about one chip, right?
in one chip.
Okay. So 50 billion transistors, 1 million cores. So we will have each core be of the order of an 8086, vintage 1979. That make sense? Maybe it does.
RISC-2 was 41,000 transistors.
Is that right?
Yes. including the big register file. So if you exclude the
And the
register
ridiculous,
file,
and the ridiculous register window thingy that you did.
it was very interesting.
But that's good. So I didn't know that number. No. It was incredibly interesting. Are you kidding? So there was 41,000 transistors on that chip.
Yes, 32-bit processor. So if you exclude the big register file, it was about 25,000 transistors.
I'm going to use that number, you know. Because now when I have 50 billion transistors divided by 1 million cores, I have RISC-2 chips, right?
You need memories. Caches are not included.
Nor was any control structure to speak of because the instruction set was pretty simplified.
The instruction set was pretty right. But, you need some cache controllers.
So what would you recommend people investigate for the architecture of 2020, just to bring it back? What research topics are out?
So there is a high-level topic of how to break down the word, certainly. There's interconnection questions. I like your memory thing, you know, that we're going to use the higher layers if that works.
We'll take another idea. How about using non-volatile memory in it instead? So you basically push disks to, I think disks are going to be like tapers now, basically archival back. You'll see fewer and fewer disks. I was going to say less and less, and
That is good, because most Americans, you're now an American, you have a carry US passport. Most Americans don't understand the difference between fewer and less, so I was delighted to not have the
you know, a lot of laptops don't even have a disk on it. So why not? Now you can integrate with high bandwidth, non-volatile memory. In fact, you're probably going to, DRAM could very well disappear in that sense. If you look at some, for the first time, I think, there are non-volatile memory technologies out there, flash being one, but if you look at these resistive technologies like what is it, PC RAS, it's got a lot of interesting characteristics. It's very dense, it's likely to scale to small nodes, and you could stick that in the system. How would you architect that? So there's a lot of interesting new research.
So before I throw away disks, the capacity of these things?
The capacity of these things is enough for personal use. I mean, it's not, you're not going to have.
So you already told me that there are laptops that don't have disks.
Well, I have one.
No, I understand, I've seen them. But because you have a laptop that doesn't have a disk, does not mean that we're ready to throw away disks.
Well, look at the base, take the Google system, right? Well, they have a basic PC with two little regular cheap disks on it. That's their disk system. They just have replicate this. Essentially, yeah, they're basically a PC board slightly modified. They've got extra disk, cheap disk. You could easily just, if you believe that's a building block, you could put that whole thing on a chip and get rid of the disks, make them non-volatile memory, and you've got a data warehouse now that has no disks in it.
So what's the capacity of the storage on that chip? I'm getting rid of non-volatile storage. The reason why we have non-volatile storage is because we need this huge capacity, I think.
Well, it's whatever you've got on your typical, laptop-sized disk.
And that's going to go on a chip.
And that's going to go on a chip.
So now I've got interest.
I mean, I have one. You can buy one. It's not a big thing.
I'd have to spend money.
So what I'm saying is that there's another opportunity. What are we going to do in 2020? I think lots of different things. We're going to look at heterogeneous systems. Right? We're going to look at maybe how you can stack things. There's new architectural opportunities. You could put non-volatile memory in that mix. High bandwidth connection to non-volatile memory, no less.
I have one concern with all this 3D integration and putting everything on the cube. It's starting to look more like a glass than a cube.
Like a what?
A glass or the Eiffel Tower, actually, because you keep stacking things. Okay, but then the problem is, well, the experience we've learned through the hard way with the Moreno string computer. DRAMs fail. Disks fail. You have to replace them. Every week, somebody from the operations department has to go into that glass house, take out the blade, remove the faulty DIMM, put another one in. They're guaranteed for life, which means they'll give you another one. But it doesn't mean they don't fail.
Yeah,
Okay?
I mean,
How do you replace a faulty DRAM on a 3D stack?
you throw the whole thing away.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, you
my $500 now.
Yeah, that's right, but that's what you do, that's what we do right now with
That's what you do
automobiles.
with blade, a lot of blade, I mean, a lot of these warehouses, they don't go in there, get the blade and repair and unsolder a thing for a socket, they just throw it out the window.
You know, when I was a kid, so I don't know, you know what a carburetor is that mixes the air and the gas? And they had this thing that used to flip, right, depending on how fast you wanted to go. And it was a little 10-cent pin, cotter pin, that kept it working. And if it broke, you went to the Radio Shack and you spent 10 cents and you replaced it. You know what they do now? They just throw out the whole sub-assembly, it costs you $1,000.
I mean, look,
Put in, so why is that not the
yeah,
answer?
I mean, you can have to build some fault tolerances in this thing, but regardless, it doesn't matter whether you stack it this way or you just lay it out on a two-dimensional single chip, because, you know, in 2020, that we're going to be able to put a lot of stuff on that. If any one of those things breaks on that, you throw that away. So I don't see that as being an objection. One objection, if you want to do things like this, is power and thermal issues, because you're starting to get power density that might make the thing not feasible.
So I agree with the fault tolerance. In fact, that's obvious. In fact, for every one, you might want two, so they can, you know, talk to each other, make sure that they're working correctly. But what about communication between these? So yes, you've got this tremendous capacity because it's spread out across each one of these chips. Now you need a piece of data and it's over here.
I'm doing the following sort of thought experiment, and that is, look, you've got these things that let you do stuff that we couldn't do, and it's likely that they'll be in some form in the system of 2020. Think about how they might be put together. I don't know the answer. It seems that when there's new technologies that come along, there's new opportunities to design things, or creating new machines in a different form. It's still computers, but and there's a lot of new interesting stuff that's happening. Think about it. That's all. I don't know the solution.
Seems like.
No, I just wanted to go back to the hierarchical thing. Okay, I could only agree with you. Okay, and most likely applications are going to end up being organized like that. You cannot take one application and split 1 million fine-grained tasks and expect one guy to organize everything. Okay, you're going to have to build up a hierarchy. Now my question is whether those managers, okay, those multiple levels of managers are going to be of the same type. Okay, so and how many types of processors are you going to have? So you're going to have the assembly guys that do the painting of the front side of the car. There's the assembly guys that do the installation of the electrical system. Okay, so they're going to be heterogeneous at that level. So are they going to be heterogeneous at the manager level as well? I think they all come from the same MEA school.
But we still want to have the best guy as the president and not the worst.
Okay, no,
Yeah,
you're going to establish a hierarchy, right?
What do you say?
The best guy as a president, I think the guys you proved the opposite in the United States, right?
Bulgarian.
Yes. A few years ago.
So I don't see where that's inconsistent. So I have a large granularity task. It gets sent to the manager, if you will, that has accelerators hung off of it. And one accelerator is painting and the other accelerator is electrical, whatever. I think it boils down to the granularity of the task you send to the, so I don't buy 1 million cores. I've never bought 1 million cores. In fact, now I've got this great example. The RISC-2 chip had 41,000 transistors in it. Designed by Manolis in 1983, maybe, 82.
80 to 82.
Huh?
81 to 82.
But, okay, so I was wrong. I was gonna say 82, 83, 81, 82. With Bob Sherburne, by the way. And I like, so I don't think we're gonna have millions of cores. I just, maybe I'm just thinking too conservatively. So it's certainly at a higher level, how do you organize the work so that this operating system, whatever, scheduler, can hand it off correctly? And if it's necessary to have whatever that middle manager is to break it down further, so I don't find that inconsistent. I don't quarrel with that.
So I'm getting a clearer picture of what this 2020 chip is going to look like.
Okay, go ahead.
So it's this heterogeneous multi-core. It's got multiple levels of manager boards. Maybe one or a few of them run the operating system. And then there's a whole bunch of specialized workers that have been virtualized in some way. Okay, well, getting there. But all of that, I don't think is there. Because the closest thing, as Trevor has been mentioning, is this embedded system on a chip that we have today. Okay, but I don't think they are virtualized, so this support has come up several times. There's no virtualization support in the DSPs. Most of them don't even have memory management units. Okay, so there's a whole lot of work to do.
So the other thing that the business, so what I've been preaching is heavyweight versus Mickey Mouse. And I think, so that I would embed within this current discussion, that the task will be given to the heavyweight versus given to the manager of the Mickey Mouse. So let's say it is an application that benefits from embarrassingly parallel stuff. Why can't there be a manager, you give the task to that manager that then distributes it, I don't know, maybe SIMD, maybe GPU, which is a classic example of what SIMD plus SMT. In fact, okay, there we go. So the GPU is an example of a manager that has underneath it huge number of Mickey Mouse cores. And that's one part of the chip.
And it has a hardware, a specialized hardware to manage all those Mickey Mouse. There's a hardware thread manager, I think.
Yeah, so the current GPU, sure. So
That's one other advantage we have over regular organizations. We can hard code the managers. We don't have to send them to MBA school.
yeah, so yes. Now, how much of that is going to be hard coded, and how much of that's going to allow for programmability? Of course, I have no idea.
Probably the professor who was working for ARM and his formula, right? You have functionality divided by energy dollars. This type of approach is also going to shape the way you have managers more or less hard-coded, more or less programmable. Most likely, depending on the target application, you can play with this programmability of each type of core that is going to be in your system. So I don't think this is a problem in itself, and it's people who are actually going to design the chips are going to decide what is best and how much flexibility they should program and design into the system. Right? I think about the possibility to share resources. I think the GPUs in the current systems cannot be used by more than one application at a time. So it's a very clear example of how they have a very powerful accelerator that can only be used by one application at a time, and nobody complains about it. So NVIDIA and ATI are never going to change that until people come to them and ask them that they want to run 3 accelerator applications at the same time. Right now, you can only accelerate one video or one CUDA application, and then the second one you want to start, you get an error. Resource busy, buy another GPU. That's their flexibility right now.
Is that true? So I don't know enough about the NVIDIA chip to know that you cannot run more than one application at the same time. In principle, there's no reason. In principle, there's no reason why you can't. But I don't know enough about the details of the chip. But the way the chip works, I do know. In fact, I sort of quipped it earlier that I would say GPU equals SMT plus SIMD, and that's true. That's fact. And so there's no reason in principle that you couldn't take the SMT part and make it work on more than one application. I'm not saying they do. I'm saying that I don't think that's a major change. I may be thinking too simplistically. I often do. But why would that be? So you agree with me, or am I wrong?
It's a protection issue. So if you allow 2 applications to run on the GPU using 2 of the SMT
Okay, so first of all, he's correct that you can only run one
You
at a
can
time.
only run one.
Fine. And if you allow more than one using the multi-threaded capability of the GPU, then you have a protection problem.
You have a protection problem.
So why can't that, is that protection problem insurmountable, or is it something that a couple of tag bits will solve?
It's solvable, but it's complexity that I guess NVIDIA didn't want to go through.
So I push back a little bit more, you say solvable, it's easily solvable, or that complexity, and so I don't see that complexity as being huge, but it's also the case that it can be small and yet you don't want to go down that path.
Well, the easy solution would involve adding a delay on memory accesses, because every time you launch a memory access, you have to check if you have permissions to do it or not. So even if it's only a fraction of a cycle, it's going to end up
Other
at a cost.
MMU, right? Other MMU.
Okay, at an MMU you have protection. 1 cycle, 2 cycles.
Add a bit to the TLB, add to the page table entry. This bit's associated with that application, this page is associated with that application, this page is associated with that application.
They don't have a page table. They go straight. Physical addresses.
How do you switch context in this GPU? They have a lot of cores. You have to save the state of all those processors somewhere, right? I don't think this is
Well, that's the nice thing about caches versus local memories. Okay, why don't you have context switching support in the GPU? Why don't you have context switching support in this New York machine that Yale was mentioning? Okay, because you have to save the state of that damn local memory. In caches, you just have tags. If you don't have a tag hit, it's a miss. You go find it somewhere else. You don't have to save anything. So this is also conditioning. If you want to share the accelerator, are we going to have to give up on local memories? Are we going to be pushed into using caches just for context switching?
I don't think CMD
That's-
caches make a very good thing. So
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
SIMD processors and caches don't usually go very well together. So a GPU with a big cache instead of all those shared memories that they have now, I don't think, I might be thinking wrong.
Anybody else? So the note from Yamo said that you can go on until 4 p.m.
Good.
U-Y-O-U space can, C-A-N. There was only one character in this whole string of characters that I was concerned about. But if we run out of gas, then we should call it a day. And apparently, so not 4 p.m., he said 2 p.m., which would give us 2 hours today. An hour and a half yesterday was too much, so he gave us 2 hours today, which is good scheduling algorithm.
Let's go to ours.
But if we've gone now for an hour and a half, and it feels like the energy has dropped. So there's a lot of good stuff here, and we'll see, maybe we'll continue it next year. If, do these guys fill out feedback, what they liked and what they didn't like, and what we should do next
Oh,
year?
yeah, they'll do.
Huh?
Yes, they'll do.
Is that part of the package or something?
It is somehow part
Huh?
of the package. Yes, it is.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
So please give feedback, and I don't know, was this a good idea having a panel, or was it a bad idea? The program hierarchy here can figure out what to do next year.
Exactly.
Okay?
But no, let's.
So I think we're pretty much petered out, and we've had it for an hour and a half. We should probably call it.
You even kept some notes?
I did keep a lot of notes, yeah.
Very good. So, we'll hear about it. So let's take the panel, guys.